So, for the past 12 years, the annual Arab Youth Survey has helped us peek into the hopes, the frustrations, the fears of the dynamic group of youngsters from the Middle East and North Africa. Sunil John is president of Middle East at Burson Cohen & Wolf and founder of ASDA'A BCW and the survey itself. He and I have talked about this survey, and as Yusuf Otaiba said, there's sometimes some real surprises, and you can walk away and feel really good about something. On the other hand, and you look into this study, and I would encourage everyone to go to the website, look at the data, look at the numbers in much greater degree than we can today, and there are also some major red flags about the region. So Sunil, great to see you. It's your survey. Tell us what we should know.
Thank you, Steve. It's indeed a pleasure to join you from the UAE today. And I really enjoyed the comments that His Excellency Ambassador Al Taiba made on the rest of the world understanding the Middle East a little bit better, which is why we started this survey way back in 2008. And indeed, the survey has traveled quite an epochal 12 years and has actually captured the most important demographic of the region. And this is our 12th survey, which we have themed The Voice for Change. And in fact, really connects with the theme of your webinar today, Aspiration and Resilience of Arab Youth and the COVID era. So I'm very happy to present those findings today. If you can go to the next slide, you will see the methodology we use. The survey is done by our sister firm, PSB Research. And in fact, the main survey was done during January 19th to March 3rd, much before the COVID-19 pandemic really impacted the region. But we then later did a COVID-19 pulse survey in August to ensure what has been the impact of COVID among these countries. The survey is done among Arab youth in 17 Arab countries, Arab youth in the age group of 18 to 24. 50% of the sample are men and another 50% female. In the first main interview, we did 3,400 face-to-face interviews. These are not online interviews, and that's why the reliability of their findings are much more. These 17 Arab states are from the Gulf countries, the 6 Gulf countries, the North African region, and the Levantine countries. This year in 2020, we included Syria after a gap of nearly 9 years, and we went to the Sudanese youth for the first time. Put together, we are bringing the results of speaking to 4,000 Arab youth, men and women. In our main survey findings, we focus on about 10 findings, but I have identified 5 of those top findings, which we think are relevant for your audience today. So if you go to the next slide, the first finding, which we thought was very surprising, and it kind of captured the imagination of media across nearly 53 countries where these findings were actually reported, reaching nearly 1 billion people in terms of results. The first finding is that nearly half of all Arab youth in these 17 countries have considered leaving their nation. And 1/3 now are even more likely to emigrate during the COVID-19 pandemic. If you go to the next slide, you'll see the numbers here. And here, nearly 2 in 5 young Arabs, 42% of all, have considered emigrating to another country, including 15% who are actively trying to leave their country. This finding, in fact, had a huge impact in the region, and in fact was took a lot of people by surprise. And I want to bring to your attention one particular tweet by His Highness Sheikh Mohammed bin Rashid Al Maktoum, the UAE Vice President and Prime Minister and the ruler of Dubai. And he says, and I quote, "It is painful that half of our Arab youth want to emigrate. If governments are corrupt, the country will be ruined, its security diminished, and its people will want to leave." And that is probably one of the most stark statements coming from a head of state to look at what these findings really mean to the Arab region. And if you look at, but when we really dive down into the numbers, and if you look at the bar charts on the right, you will see the highest number of young Arabs who said they are considering emigrating are coming from the Levantine region, 63% in total, followed by North Africa, around 47%, and then the GCC is just about 13%. And if you want to know which of these countries really make up that large proportion of number, if you go to the next slide, you'll see the country breakup of the 17 countries, and you will see Lebanon, Libya, Iraq, and Yemen, almost from 77% to 65%, are the countries that are most likely to consider, youth in these countries are most likely to consider emigrating. And obviously the lowest in the spectrum are from the GCC countries, as you can see, just about 3% from the UAE alone. And when we ask respondents, why do they look at this? Two key reasons: struggling economies and corruption in government. So these young people are looking for opportunity, and that's what is lacking in their nations. And this is a serious sign in terms of what governments and private sector should be doing to be able to make sure that the wealth of the nation, as His Highness talks of the Arab youth as the wealth of the nation, should stay there and continue to be able to build those nations. And in the August COVID survey, the trend, in fact, even further worsened, where nearly more than 1/3 of the Arab youth now are more likely to emigrate. And 76% of the Arab youth say that corruption in government is still present despite the pandemic. So that's the first finding on migration. And if you look at the next one, which is on personal identity, and this is something that we've been looking at for quite some time, and here the finding is that religion is central to the personal identity of young Arabs, more so than anything else, including family or nationality. And if you look at this finding in terms of the answer, when we ask the question, which of the following is most important to your personal identity? If you go to the next slide, you will see nearly 40% identify my religion as the main factor of identifying their identity, followed by 19% my family, my tribe, 17% my nationality, 7% my Arab heritage, another 7% my political beliefs, and then 5% each for my language and my gender. But when you dive a little deeper into these numbers, you will see that only 61% from the North African sample see religion as a defining aspect of their personal identity, 29% in the Levant, and roughly about 27% in the GCC. So, you see some very important regional differences that emerge when you look at it, where religion is not as important in the Gulf and Levant as it is in the North African region. If you go to the next slide, this is an important slide where we ask two key questions. We ask people, does religion play a too big a role in the Middle East, in society? And as you can see, and this is the blue, the ones on the left, the blue bars talks of 2019 numbers. 66% agreed with that notion. In fact, it actually increased to 67% in 2020. And the second question, does the Arab world need to reform their religious institutions? 79% agreed in 2019, a slight drop, 66% in 2020. So while religion defines their personal identity, young people feel that religion plays too big a role in society. So it's more a personal belief than something that governs them in terms of their daily life as such. The next finding, we think, in fact, when we presented this to Steve some time ago, he found this the most interesting finding, and this is about, if you go to the next slide, on gender rights. And here, as the finding says, most young Arabs say that they have the same rights as men, but their work and family responsibilities are increasing since COVID-19. And if you go to the next slide, when you look at the finding, we asked the women. So this is just the women sample. The 50% of the sample are women, as I told you before. They feel 64% of the young women feel that they have same rights as the men folk. And you can see actually no regional differences. They feel the women who feel that they have the same rights in GCC 71%, in North Africa 62%, and in the Levant 60%. So you can see that these findings are, the feeling is similar across the three regions. If you go to the next slide, and this is an important one where we actually look at, which is closer to, we asked, do the access of education and jobs, are they equal? 70% of the women feel they have access. Another 52% feel that they have equal opportunities, just like their men. And on to the next slide, where we ask them the question, do you think, we asked the women sample, do you think that a woman working would benefit the family? And look at that finding. 76% of the women said, yes, it benefits the family. But, more surprisingly as well, when we asked them the sample of men, 70% as well agreed. And these are 18 to 24-year-old sample. We asked the same question way back in 2008. The findings were diametrically opposite. So as you can see, as the region progresses, young people are seeing a huge change in their outlook. To the next finding, which is on model nations, and this shouldn't come as a surprise. And we introduced this question way back in 2012. And for the 9th year in succession, the Arab youth across the 17 countries see UAE as the top country that they want to live in and their own nation to emulate. And this, if you go to the next slide, you will see that the UAE's choice is is compared to 30 of the most major Western and Eastern nations. So as you can see, when we asked the question, which country in the world, if any, would you like to live in? The UAE came as the number one choice at 46. The US came second at 33, Canada at 27, the UK at 27, and Germany at 22. And this has been a consistent finding we've had over the last 9 years. And the next slide is about which country do their own should emulate, and that's nearly 52%. Seeing UAE as the right economic model, as a model nation for their own nations to emulate. The final finding, if you can move forward on foreign relations, a very interesting one. And here we asked them which of these nations are the rising powers, and Saudi Arabia, UAE, and US are seen as the three rising powers in the region. And when you look at numbers, we asked the question of Arab nations. If you go to the next slide, you will see nearly 39% of the Arab youth identified Saudi Arabia as the number one rising power in the region, followed closely by the UAE at 34%. And among the non-Arab countries, you will see the United States coming in a very strong number one at 46%, followed by Turkey at 20%, Russia at 16%, and Iran at 14%. And if you look at how do they see these countries in terms of, are they your enemy or your adversary, or enemy or your ally? If you go to the next slide, you will see UAE comes on the top of this list. If you move to the next slide, please, you'll see UAE seen by 89% of the sample across 17 countries as an ally, as a friend. And you can see Egypt and Saudi Arabia following closely at 80 and 78%. At the bottom of the pile is Iran, where only 36% feel they are an ally, and United States at 56%, where it's a kind of a polarized view there. So when you really look at all the findings, if you go to the next slide, what I talked to you about are 5 of the top findings. Nearly half of young Arabs want to leave their country, frustrated with struggling economies and government corruption, something that governments and civil society should be looking at seriously. Personal identity, I think religion defines a lot of people, but there are definite regional differences here between North Africa, Levant, and the Gulf. Gender rights, I think, a very, very important finding. Women in the Arab world are finding themselves with equal opportunity, both in educational access to education and in jobs. And I think that is a hugely positive sign, and in fact challenges several of the stereotypes that especially built in the Western world. And of course, the UAE is seen as a beacon on the hill, as a city on the hill, as having shown the way as a model nation, and young people across the region see that as an aspirational model for their own nations to emulate. And in foreign relations, the scene has been changing dramatically over the last 5 to 6 years, and the fact that Saudi Arabia, UAE, and the United States have emerged as three major powers in foreign relations is a hugely significant finding. Steve, I think that's what I have for your wonderful audience today. And I'm sure the panel that you have coming forward would be able to discuss these.
Well, thank you, Sunil. That's a really great outline, and I'm always fascinated. Now I know whether UAE likes the study. I mean, they didn't have anything to do with the study, but everybody want to move, makes them feel good. But I want to tell them there's some part of the walkability of Yas Island we got to work on. But that's it. I mean, couple just quick thoughts from you. One, did a gender revolution happen in the Middle East when we weren't looking? Like, that is the biggest thing that hit me in contrast to earlier iterations of this study. Where did that come from?
I think that's been actually happening on a steadily over the last several years. But this year, the finding jumped at us, Steve, and we wanted to be able to focus on that. I think when you arrive in a city like Riyadh, or you see what happens in Dubai or Abu Dhabi, you will see that in offices. I think the UAE Prime Minister's office, nearly 80% of his staff are women, and you can see that energy coming there. So, most often in the past, people would say that, 50% of the population of the Arab world are not being productive. I think the exact opposite is happening. Right. But the fact is that, in the Levant and many countries in North Africa as well, women do have a rising position in society. And I think you're right. There has been a change in the gender equation in these countries, and for the good.
And just real quick, last question, Sunil. When I see something where it lists China and Russia as less of an enemy in the minds of these youth in the region than Americans, what are we getting wrong?
I think we've been looking at this for quite some time, and the U.S. was at its peak in 2016 as the most favored nation, as an ally. But that dropped during the Trump presidency quite a lot. And that's a feeling on the Arab street. And we've seen that come up this year a bit. So in fact, if you look at the 2019 and the 2018 numbers for the United States, they were really bad. And you could see the rise of Russia and Iran as a strong power in the region. But that has abated now. And I think it's a very positive result for the United States. They're emerging as a stronger and a much more involved power in the Middle East, and we can see that. So I think you're doing a few things right, and you can see that in the numbers. It's been a pickup in the numbers.
I know you're not a kumbaya guy. You're a sharp realist. I know we got work to do. But Sunil John, president of BCW Middle East, founder of ASDA'A BCW, thank you so much. I love having this conversation with you every year. Thank you.
Thank you, Steve.